Okay, let's get this thing started. First of all, thank you for coming today. It's 2:30. It's a little late, the day after the Super Bowl, so by a show of hands, how many watched the Super Bowl last night? By a show of hands, how many people are hungover? Ooh, one honest one. Well, welcome to our session today. My name is Greg Fitzpatrick. I'm with Cochran Supply and Engineering, working business development for IoT and integration, right? All things OT. Also the executive director for the Real Estate Cyber Consortium, other known as the RECC. Some people call it the REC. Our session is about cybersecurity in the BAS space, right? In particular, we're going to discuss zero trust. How many of you all are familiar with the term zero trust? Okay, we've got a handful. How many consulting engineers do we have in the audience? Get them up high, I want to see. How many systems integrators? Okay, we've got some SIs. How many end users, owner-operators? So the rest of you guys are manufacturers, OEMs, and distributors? I'm here. There you go. Well, today I've got three gentlemen joining me. Very happy to have them. I appreciate their time. Aaron Brondum from Neve, Mike McMahon from Newcomb and Boyd, who's also a RECC member, and so is Neve, and Jim Lee for Symmetrics. Gentlemen, start off by introducing yourselves, tell them a little bit about what you do and how you figure into this whole cyber thing.
Yeah, so Aaron Brondum, I lead business development at Neve. I like to call myself a recovering system integrator. I've been in the software space probably the last 8 years, but before that I was that contractor out doing all the projects. Excited to be a part of this. I think cybersecurity is a gap, especially when it comes around OT cybersecurity that needs to be filled, and there's still a lot of work left to be done around it. And I feel like the solution that we provide at Neve is filling that gap.
Great. My name is Jim Lee. I'm president of Symmetrics. We're based out of Boston. I've been kicking around the industry for about 35 years and been very actively involved in BACnet. I founded what is now BACnet International. We set up BACnet testing labs. Been involved in developing BACnet cybersecurity for the past 15 years. And I'll give you a little perspective about what AHR and the BACnet community has been doing on cybersecurity. Thanks.
And my name is Mike McMahon. I'm with Newcomb and Boyd. I'm a consulting engineer. I lead our intelligent building studio there. We design a lot of smart buildings. My background is network architecture and cybersecurity. I did a lot of pen testing and all kinds of fun stuff trying to see what I can get into. And so I noticed in the built environment there's a lot of risk. And so one of the things I wanted to do is try to change the industry's paradigm on cybersecurity and the way we operate our buildings. And I chose Newcomb and Boyd because they had a pretty good reputation in that space of being right in the middle between the system integrators and the owners. And so I keep reading all these specifications that would come out when I was a system integrator. I'm like, who is writing Windows XP? Come on. And so I found out the area and focus, and that's what I'm trying to do today, is try to change some of that paradigm.
So thank you, gentlemen. So I want to start with you, Mike. And from a 30,000-foot view, right, zero trust is one of those hot buttons now that we hear when it comes to cybersecurity. Just from a very fundamental standpoint, how would you describe zero trust?
All right, I'll put on my lift shoes. So zero trust is a concept. It is also a practical application. And I see that zero trust for me means I don't trust anybody. And there's a lot of trust in the industry. I trust that everywhere down the chain, someone's going to do the right thing. And that means it's subjective what the right thing actually is. Just because I'm buying a product that is securable doesn't mean I'm going to secure it. Doesn't mean it gets secured, and therefore a risk is being introduced into the building. Zero trust is a great methodology because it pairs a thing with a person. That's where the methodology comes into play. And so now I know exactly who and what are interfacing, and I have some means of control.
How about you, Jim?
So I'll define zero trust as or cybersecurity in general, as a set of defenses, or if you imagine an old castle with a moat around it. What we've done and what we've done in IT over the years is basically build a moat to protect our systems. And over the years, we've made smaller and smaller concentric moats. And if we look at micro-segmentation or things people do in IT security, it's effectively going down to more and more granular levels for cybersecurity. But what zero trust means for this industry is actually putting cybersecurity certificates or keys down in the lowest level devices that we have. So variable air volume boxes, terminal units. And by putting that cybersecurity at the very end, we can actually control what people can get to, because if you don't have the key or the cybersecurity certificate, you can't get in. And we're actually taking that a step further to get to zero trust, and we're adding something called authorization. And authorization is a question of who gets to do what. So if I don't want my chiller to be able to write commands to my boiler, because why should it, right? So authorization, and if you look at this in an IT context, the IT technology that we would talk about is Active Directory, which decides what your privileges are and what you can do. Imagine that in BACnet going forward, not only do we have security certificates that are going to lock the end door, but we're also going to have permissions that only allow people to do what they're supposed to be able to do. That's how I view zero trust.
Like to add anything to that, Aaron?
Yeah, I like to maybe simplify it a bit more. And, we're all staying in hotels right now, right? We all can walk right in the front door, and then we have to get a card to get to our room. And that's the only place we can get to. And I like to spend a lot of time talking about the difference between zero trust network access and VPNs. And so if you think about a VPN, when you're connecting or entering a building, you're just going through the front door. And once you're in the front door, you have full access to everything within that building. And I think what zero trust is doing is saying, hey, I'm going to let you in, but now I'm only letting you in to get to that specific location. So think of your hotel room. You don't want anybody else going in there. With a VPN, imagine all the doors are unlocked. You can get everywhere you need to go. With zero trust, you're locked down, like these gentlemen said, to that specific endpoint.
So in other words, it's verify and continuously verifying as the device communicates on the network?
That, and also monitoring what's happening while you're connected. If something bad starts to happen, or anomaly starts to happen, shut it down immediately. Shut it down immediately. A VPN, there's nothing once you're connected that's going to actively monitor and shut you down.
So when you look at the next 5 years, when it comes to cybersecurity and zero trust, right, is one of those principles that we're going to continuously talk about. What do you see are some of the main challenges from an BAS and OT perspective in relation to cybersecurity? What do you see some of the biggest challenges for commercial, industrial, any of the vertical markets?
Yeah, great question, Greg. I think it really comes down to is who owns it, right? We've been talking about OT cybersecurity for years and years and years. I go to Realcomm. We have a whole day committed to it, and it's the same conversation over and over again. The SIs say the owners own it. The owners say the SIs own it. Somebody's got to take ownership of it. But the real problem is what's the solution, right? We're taking Cisco, we're taking Palo Alto Networks gear that are IT, purpose-built, specific things, and we're trying to adapt it to OT. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. You end up spending a lot more money than you need to make it happen. And so I think the evolution of having product-specific offerings and solutions designed specific for OT is a big part of it. I think is also an opportunity for any system integrator out there to take a moment and take a step back and go, like, here's a gap in the market. Nobody's filling it. Maybe I could become not just a controls contractor, but a true system integrator for my customer and also provide that cybersecurity and create some really great new reoccurring revenue for their businesses.
Yeah, so when you look at most end users, right, they have their IT department, they have their facilities department or construction department, right? One of the things we're doing at the RECC is the development of the OPR, the Owner's Project Requirements, that has cyber embedded into it so it can get passed down to the stakeholders who are involved in OT projects, right? So when you look at third and fourth party risk from an IT perspective, you're typically looking at an IT solutions provider. But when you're looking at third, fourth, and then maybe fifth party, right, risk when it comes to cyber, now you're looking at a construction manager, a consulting engineer, a systems integrator, maybe a commissioning agent, right? All of those are stakeholders that can be involved in an OT project. When it comes to the design side, Mike, for you, when it comes to the design side, Where do you see those challenges are getting consulting engineering firms to adopt these strategies and adopt cyber as their into their design practices?
Ultimately, it comes from impetus. There always has to be a reason to change. And the OPR document is a very useful tool that we're working with the REC to develop, because it stipulates a North Star. It gives the owner the opportunity and their IT group and whoever else is involved in design to say, I want a secure building. That's all it does. It doesn't stipulate how. Those become standards later, but then those standards get delivered to the design teams, the consulting engineers, the design build people, all those in the marketplace that have to take the pen to paper and make it reality. And so it's tying all of those gaps, and it's making everybody understand exactly where their place is and what their responsibilities are. I'm not going to go to a facilities operations person and say, you're now responsible for cybersecurity. Well, no, I'm responsible for the operations of the building. Cybersecurity is the how I maintain my buildings, right? But if you can get everybody in alignment that you want to have a secure facility, then the designers will have to take note of that and have to make those changes. My background, I've worked with our MEP side of the house on the design to insert basic cyber hygiene language. And that's not, anything that you do on a daily basis, right? You get an email account, you get an email from Google, or you get a notification from your browser that says, hey, this password's been found in a hack. You might want to change it, right? So what's the first thing that I put in? Don't use default passwords. Don't use admin as a user, because it denotes privilege level, right? And it takes me 2 seconds to look up online and Google this piece of equipment and what its user manual is and how do I log into it. Change the defaults. It's very simple things that we have now inserted in our spec language that can allow a system integrator to get brought up to speed to say, oh, I can change the default password. I can do this. Every time you make those simple changes, you're reducing the amount of risk being introduced into the environment. And that's why I call it basic cyber hygiene. We're not talking about going out and providing like top tier IT cyber hardening, level 4, level 4 NIST 853. I mean, there's all kinds of numbers I could throw out there, but it's how do you change the industry? It's one bite at a time, really, of the elephant. That's all we're doing now. And so that's where we're at. That's why I kind of want to see this whole thing kind of come together.
Right, because we're trying to start from a very fundamental standpoint, right? Lay some groundwork. And it's because OT is a lot different from IT. Jim, for you, what specific OT challenges do you see that typically come up when dealing with IT groups?
Well, I think that that there's one macro thing I want to bring in, which is who's going to pay for OT right now. So we're stuck in an area where OT, or what we do, are basically, if you look at cybersecurity over this area, it's a process. Everything that we do in this industry is based on economics around products or projects. So they're discrete in time. And when we design a building, that building is designed to be set up to operate for 30 years. And the problem with cybersecurity is you can't capitalize cybersecurity because it moves too quickly. And the same goes for analytics or any other operating element of a building. So if we start out with the fact that you cannot look into your crystal ball and come up with a paradigm for funding cybersecurity without getting your customers to realize that it's an operating item. So if you look at IT, it's an expensed operating cost. It is not a capital cost. But anything that goes into a building process is usually looked at as a capital cost. So when we start out at that level, we end up with a huge gulf between what we're able to pay for and who's willing to pay for what. And to me, that's the biggest challenge. Now, when we get beyond that into technology challenges, we thought as an industry that IT would subsume OT and come in and take this over. And we've now lived in this ecosystem for the past 20 years while we were waiting for that to happen, and it hasn't happened. And it looks like it's not going to. In fact, the IT people came in and looked at the complexity of what we do in OT and went screaming in the other direction. So right now where we really are is IT still wants to have override and supervision and knowledge of what we're doing, but they really want OT people to handle the daily bits and bytes and operate these systems. So
And it kind of goes back to one of the things that, and I keep bringing up the RECC because it's filled with CTOs, CIOs, and CISOs who deal with IT challenges every day. But now OT is huge, right? And it's a mainstay, and they know it's not going anywhere. So for us in the BAS world or the OT world, we're looking for products and solutions that can address things that are zero trust, right? That can be the easy button on the installation side, can be things that facilities people understand. Whether it's a network monitoring tool, whether it's an IP infrastructure that's built for facilities, or whether it's a firewall slash remote access strategy. And that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about, Aaron. When it comes to remote access strategies, what would you look at as the fundamental parts that should be addressed when looking at a solution? You know, take name tags off, take branding off, take labels off, just from a very fundamental standpoint. If I'm a systems integrator, master systems integrator, what should I be looking for in a product to address remote access?
I'm going to answer that. I'm going to pile on to the REC conversation just a little bit, RECC. So REC, great organization, like Greg mentioned, you know, we've got top tier real estate companies, universities involved along with different vendors. And so a good example is there's a customer of ours who, you know, went all, and maybe back to the other point is, I think the real estate takes one of two approaches to OT. They go all in, Cisco, Palo Alto gear, they're spending tons of money on it, or they just turn a blind eye and go, all right, you system integrators, card access vendors, whatever, take care of it yourself. And the problem we have there is ransomwares are happening every day. If you're a system integrator in this room, how many ransomware attacks, have you been involved with a ransomware attack or know of a ransomware attack in the last 2 years? Everybody? Everybody. It's happened. I've been around the country with Greg and other people last 10 months, probably met with 50 system integrators. Every single one is dealing with ransomware attacks. It's a real thing that's happening. And it's hard for real estate to find dollars to do something if they're not already spending dollars. So at REC, we've got two REITs. One's on the West Coast, one's on the East Coast. One's all in on Cisco. And just for some perspective, they spend a ton of money on it. Millions of dollars every year just in software as a service agreements. And they have close to 30 people on staff to manage their portfolio buildings. Now we have another one on the West Coast that is found a very specific OT purpose-built solution that has 2 people on their staff. And they reduce their costs by 75%. And they're fully protected. So there is a difference there, and so I like to bring that out. But back to your original point of, you know, what do you need to have as far as protecting your building? You need to stop using VPNs. That's where ransomware attacks are happening.
Push pause. How many people are still using VPNs? Hold that thought. Hands high. Now, is this as a result of your IT group? Pretty much, right? How many have in-house IT groups? By show of hands. By show of hands, how many outsource it? Okay. Go ahead.
So the next is you got to move to zero trust. There's no more shared usernames and passwords. There are no more public IP addresses to go to. It needs to be linked to somebody's unique persona, probably their company email, linked in with their single sign-on solution with multi-factor authentication, so you know who's connecting to what and when they're connecting to it and what they're doing while they're connected to it. It has to be a zero trust solution. If you guys go back and talk to your IT people and say, hey, I heard we need to get rid of VPNs and start going to zero trust, your IT people are going to look at you and they're going to be surprised and go like, yes, you are right. We should have already done this.
So Mike, for you, we talked about adoption, right? How difficult it is to get all of the stakeholders to adopt cybersecurity, let alone zero trust, right? So what do you see are some of the fundamental things that a design firm should be looking for And I know we don't have many designers out there, but we do have systems integrators. How many systems integrators consider yourselves as a trusted advisor for your customer and they come to you for all things OT? By show of hands, right? So you're the smart ones. So at the end of the day, if there's design build projects coming out or they need assistance, right? The owner needs you to assist their consulting engineer with writing specifications and things like that. What are some of the fundamental things they need to make sure that they get into the specification?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Back in my day, when I worked for healthcare, I was introduced to both OT but also medical devices. And I'd have things show up and say, oh, by the way, we're GE, we're putting 22 anesthesia carts on your wireless network today, and we need to get them accessed. And oh, by the way, they don't support any of the latest protocols for security. It's WEP encryption, which went out 15 years ago. But you can't change it because we're FDA certified. And so I coined the term feral cat. You literally just took a feral cat and dropped it off and expect me to take care of it. And I'm going to get scratched and it's going to go crazy. So the approach is the same. If you take a look at OT equipment, it has evolved. Not all of it, most of it has evolved to give some user control, right? Control over the users of the equipment. Therefore, we talk about changing IDs and passwords. We talk about the ability to integrate with IT systems like Active Directory. Those are systems that are managed by your IT folks that give you access to your email and shared drives and all the other fun stuff that you have. So some basic things that I would look for in a product line is the ability to perform or have those settings, those default settings changed. I would also take a look at what is exposed. Like what are the full capabilities of this thing? We do audits all the time for controls upgrades and we do cyber audits and cyber commissioning. One of the big things that I found is interfaces that are left on. So interfaces are anything that you can plug in or get connected to, right? And we're walking around this one facility and I noticed this SSID out there, this network, wireless network being broadcasted. Now, obviously, when you get connected here on your phone, it's one of my favorite things to do is see what other people call their networks. I found one that called My True Love. I have no idea who that is, but it's pretty cool. But this one is broadcasting a wide open network to get connected to the controllers that controlled the HVAC system in the building. And they were on every single floor, all over 10 buildings. And the only reason they weren't in the other 14 is because they hadn't been installed yet, right? So those, you have to look at those capabilities to say, okay, what does this offer me to connect to? And then, oh, should I do something about it? Yeah, just put a simple piece of verbiage in there that says, if it's not going to be in use, turn it off. If it is going to be used, then you need to change the name. You need to work with the IT group. That's the other thing I tell everybody too, is the first thing is find out if there is an IT group that you can work with. If you're working directly with facilities folks, find out if they have policies written. Cybersecurity policies, right? So that way you're walking in the door and saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to have this conversation with you. I want to see if you have these things that can help me help you. And if you don't, then it's a good conversation starter.
And that's interesting you say that because one of the things that's been a challenge is collaboration, right, between all the stakeholders. And from your perspective, Jim, because I know you do a lot of work with BACnet, how important is it for everyone from the systems integrator, consulting engineer, the owner, and someone like a commissioning agent to collaborate when it comes to cyber and ensure that cyber language is put into the job?
I think it's extremely important, and what you see now are very vague specifications because a lot of technology has come to pass. And a lot of that hasn't permeated into the general consulting community. So we have super experts like Mike who are pretty capable of it, but your rank and file consultant, this is not what they do. Oftentimes that leaves the systems integrator or the master systems integrator to do this kind of specification. And how it permeates through, once you lock these systems up with cybersecurity certificates, you can't see it anymore. So how do you commission it? How do you bring it up? And there are a lot of things that people don't think about with building automation systems. If I'm a contractor and I arrive at the job for the first time and there is no IT department, who's going to be the certificate authority? So different companies have predicated product lines where they can be the certificate authority during construction. Well, as soon as it's built, maybe the IT department comes along or the tenant comes along, and those certificates all need to be transferred to that certificate authority or of the building owner or the IT department. What happens when the building is sold? Those certificates need to be transferred again. What happens when those certificates expire? They need to be transferred again. So the entire value chain really needs to be put in such a way that it's a collaborative effort, not only between the designers, the system integrators, the commissioning agents, the operators. Because cybersecurity is an ongoing process, it's really building a new ecosystem of people that can operate, monitor, and keep track of what's going on.
So it kind of goes back to the network, right?
Right.
So when you're talking about network infrastructure, right, we know it plays a huge part in applying zero trust practices, right?
Right.
So what recommendations or technologies would you recommend to make sure that the system is hardened?
Well, I would take a slightly different tact. We saw the show of hands that everyone's using VPNs. You know, there's nothing wrong with using your VPNs, but it's a strategy. It's not the end strategy. And as we said, adding zero trust to that capability by layering, we call it defense in depth in the industry. We want to layer on these security technologies so that we cover all these bases. So a lot of the technologies that we've been working on in AHR fundamentally are fine working with the existing VPNs that are there, but they're adding extra layers of security on top of that. So I think that you can start either from an IT-centric standpoint and use the technology that IT companies are providing, like microsegmentation. You can get down into OT, into the kinds of technology that we're developing inside of ASHRAE in this community, which is actually securing the controllers themselves all the way down to the end level. Or you can partner with third-party companies that have solutions to give you this zero trust capability. So those are the different methodologies. I'm sorry.
Please go right ahead.
Sorry. I got a question that kind of builds on that. Should we expect that our design team, our contractors, our commissioning, are going to develop the capability to ensure that we're, the SSI type expertise? Is that where the industry is going?
It's called cyber harmony.
Yeah, so is that going to be built into our design team, or are we going to need that systems integrator?
My view.
It's going to become obsolete.
Yeah. So the question.
No, it's everybody.
Yeah. So the question.
Yeah.
The question
They're all
was,
gonna have a role.
What happens in the long term, or does the design team own the whole problem forever? And as Mike just said, it's a long-term problem. So you really have to develop this ecosystem, right?
Yeah, I mean, you as an owner own and operate the building. You have a design team that's going to design the things that go in the building, but there's a certain termination of effort, right, that takes place there. And then somebody else picks up the torch, so to speak. I always like to call it like the Olympic race, except it's a race that never ends. The torch just gets passed along to different groups that are involved. Now your system integrators come into play, and I've met with major manufacturers, and I met with their heads of cybersecurity, and they talk about all the changes they're making to their products to harden or give them the capability to be hardened. And I asked them one simple question. I said, are you teaching your installers how to enable these and what they actually mean? And there was just dead silence. This is a couple of years ago. That has now since changed, right? So this is becoming table stakes for the industry because, again, it all comes down to impetus. There needs to be something to happen that forces people to be able to change. And the means and methods are constantly being evaluated to figure out how to lower that bar for entry. So that way everybody can pick it up. So now the system integrator picks it up. They're done with their 1-year warranty. Now it turns over to the facility staff, who is now ultimately responsible for running it and maintaining it. So it all depends on what your capabilities are, but it's continuing down that chain. And all you're doing is you're passing the torch of liability along, but you want to make sure that everybody has a concept of what they're able to do. Yeah, that's a concept we've come up with, a cyber harmony. It's kind of like conducting an orchestra, right? So it involves so many different people. Everybody has to be on the same sheet of music, right? And so the cyber harmony concept comes up where everybody that's involved has an understanding at a certain level of what their role should be in being able to provide a secure facility.
Right. And one of the other things we're trying to promote within the RECC is the need for owners to start putting together what we like to call an OT governance team, right? And it doesn't have to be a large team. It can be one person from facilities, one person from IT, maybe someone from business, but definitely one person from facilities and one person from IT, so that facilities is aware of the technology, the protocols, the do's and don'ts when it comes to deploying OT in their built environment, right? So facilities knows exactly what manufacturers should be vetted by the IT group, what protocols should be used, what type of networking practices should be used on the OT side. And they also will make sure that all of that information is embedded within the specifications. So when you're talking to your, like you guys said, your trusted advisors for your owners and your systems integrators, start talking to them about bringing IT and OT together so that they, like for instance, we've got an OPR. The OPR ends up, the language, cyber language ends up in Division 25, right? Then it goes out to bid. Someone from that OT governance team should follow that project throughout the entire life cycle, right? Through the bidding process, post-bid evaluations, installation, commissioning, right? There should be someone from IT involved to make sure that that documentation or that verbiage that was embedded into the contract documents, right? Our specifications are contract documents, someone that can enforce it. So when you look at things like BACnet SC, for you, Jim, how important is BACnet SC, and where does it figure into the whole zero trust when it comes to remote access and securing the networks?
Super. Could you advance to the third slide I had up there for a minute? One more. Super. So BACnet's been around for a long time. Was approved as the AHR, ANSI, and ISO world standard back in 1995. Was quickly adopted for the onslaught of the internet, and by 2004, BACnet was working on cybersecurity technologies, which were unfortunately specific to BACnet, and a lot of us decided not to implement them. In 2009, we got together when Cisco tried to enter the industry, and we designed a BACnet security system where the BACnet data definitions and application layer technologies were preserved, but the communication vehicle was effectively IT technologies. Understanding that if we place the value of BACnet on top of those IT technologies, as the IT technologies evolve quickly, we'll be safe. And that was a good bet, and resulted 10 years later in the publishing of a standard called BACnet Secure Connect, or BACnet SC. BACnet SC is a robust, interoperable cybersecurity, which uses WebSockets, just like your web browser would when you see the little lock from a bank. And it uses traditional IT cybersecurity and certificates. However, it uses them in a slightly different way because our problem is different than an IT problem. So the key is that as we've gone along, we've added additional technology. And if you look at the roadmap here, you'll see that those addendums, those are actually pieces that AHR has added to the standard over the years. And with respect to Greg's question, the most important one here is Addendum CP, which was approved 5 months ago. That is the authorization and authentication standard. So once a standard is approved by AHR, it takes a couple of years to get it into a product, right? So all the companies have to engineer, design the software, test it, get it through all their quality gates. And so that's really where we are with getting authorization into BACnet, and that's going to give us our zero trust level. So we have been working with the Army Corps of Engineers. We have a Department of Defense contract to do interoperability testing of BACnet SC and a technology called Managed BACnet, which ensures interoperability of those certificates across all the different manufacturers' products. Show of hands from the Army Corps over here. So we have this program in play to make sure we can do interoperability testing of multi-vendor products to meet these zero trust requirements. And that's where we are today. And so I think that basically within 2 years, that will become ripe.
So is BTL involved in the testing certification of that, making sure that
Yes.
manufacturers comply?
Yes, they are. So there's a document which was created during the COVID pandemic, which we call the Secured by Symmetrics Manufacturer's Guide, and that is now going to be published as an ASHRAE special publication, which has been coming through the special technical group on cybersecurity in ASHRAE, and that will be published later this year. And that forms the basis of that knowledge. And that document references components of the BACnet standard and also components of IT standards that have to be in place for that BTL certification.
Since the addendum CP just came out, are there any manufacturers right now currently compliant to?
There are manufacturers that are working right now on their implementations, and I expect those to be under test, but no, they're not on the market right now. 5 months is not a product turn cycle in this industry.
Yeah.
So is this all part of the push for manufacturers to secure by design and start using secure by design practices for all their products?
Absolutely. And what we're seeing, and this is quite interesting because we've been rolling this boulder up the hill for a long time, but we finally, 2019, BACnet SC was approved. Took a few years for people to get it into products. But we are beginning to see very large jobs now where, the specification community basically put in a little line at the end which says, shall be BACnet SC. And we're hoping that Mike gets some more of these projects so that we can see real specifications. But the fact is that we see large jobs in the usual suspects: higher education, healthcare, pharma and life science, government, military, manufacturing. I don't expect this stuff to turn up in your tilt-up office portfolio anytime soon. But for those mission-critical situations, we're seeing it now. And I was talking to Scott Cochran before this. He's seeing, we've gone from a trickle to a garden hose. And 2 to 3 years, we'll see a fire hose of largely people switching over. Because, what are the alternatives? If you were a consulting engineer, if you were an owner, and you had the ability to buy secure technology and you chose not to, and there was a problem, it's really a sort of an untenable position to be in. So we think that demand will flow in areas where it's germane.
That's actually a perfect segue. No, go ahead, your question.
Also a perfect segue. Underwriting insurance how is that going to be impacted by this BACnet SC, as well as having like a systems integrator engage on a project?
We're working with a number of big insurance companies, primarily the industrial insurance companies. I'm not going to name names, but they're following this process. And when it turns into condensed matter, I think we'll be able to have it in specifications. Mike, you have something?
Yeah, thank you. Most companies have to have some type of cyber liability attestation. Not necessarily for I'm giving advice, right? Professional liability, but hey, I practice with secure practices. It's no different than you see manufacturing companies with the ISO banners out there. But it's saying I've acknowledged and accepted the risk, and I'm going to operate in this manner. And so therefore, insurance takes a look at it and says, oh, okay, we'll give you a lower premium. Eventually, that's going to ramp up a little bit more, and they're going to be coming to market with a little bit more stringent, rather than self-attestation, maybe some audits or something along those lines, to say that I'm truly operating like that. CMMC, DoD has a new, they've revamped their program for cybersecurity maturity model certification. It was just ratified, and they have different levels now redefined. And if you want to do business with the DoD, you have to be able to be audited by a third party to show that I am operating my firm in a cyber secure manner to be able to protect them. So that's why I was saying this is really just kind of developing into table stakes as it moves up the chain. And the area of vulnerability is one of the things I like to talk about too is, we're getting into smarter buildings. Smarter buildings are going to lead to connected grids. Connected grids are going to lead to large organizations. If you work in a large portfolio, people want to have visibility into all of the different aspects of their portfolio, but they have to be able to trust the data. And so there's a twofold piece. Number one, If I'm penetrating a building and I want to get access to it, I'm going to go in through the OT side, right? Because chances are good it's going to have some type of vulnerability there. And then I'm going to get access to the people in the building, right? Because I'm going in through that fashion. If I want to see who's coming and going, I'm going to go out to the video surveillance system, right? Now I'm going to see which card holder shows up at 7 a.m. every day. And I'm going to go up on LinkedIn and I'm going to stalk them and I'm going to find out who they are, because now I can incorporate social engineering. So when she comes in at 7 a.m., at 6:45, I'm going to drop a thumb drive there. And I'm going to have, Tommy's second birthday pics. Oh no, Tommy's parents lost their birthday pics. We want to get this back to him. I'm going to plug it into the computer so I can see who shows up on it. Boom, I own you, right? It's that simple. So people it's all about threat vectors, right? So people are targeting really unconnected, seemingly disconnected things to get to what they really want, and buildings are part of it. But again, it's also trusting the data. If you can, do what you can to either mitigate risk through the introduction of it through a process or a program when you're building, or you got to walk behind the elephant and try to clean it up. And how many people attack it that way? It's almost insurmountable, right? So we're trying to get the industry to make good decisions up front so that you don't have as big of a job to clean it up at the end.
And so for you, Aaron, how does a zero trust application combat and mitigate some of those risks from the OT side? Like Mike said, a lot of times threats do come in from the OT side, even if you're running a converged network.
Yeah. Well, there's it comes down to, where are the threat vectors coming in? And so Mike's example is somebody that's in the building, right? And they're not coming in from the outside. They were able to
The call's coming from in the building.
yeah. No, it's in the building. And so there's solutions out there that can help prevent that. And kind of what Jim's getting at with the BACnet SC, I remember, when I first got into the software space, and I'm in the owner's conference room with one of our programmers, and he hacked the HVAC system in a matter of minutes, right? And then the owner's sitting back, it was that easy. Because BACnet today, until BACnet SC, it's very easy to hack and manipulate. But getting back to that zero trust, it's getting the zero trust internally, inside, but then, this is the world we live in, it's all moving to the cloud. You as system integrators, you as owners that have vendors, we don't want to have to roll trucks every time something needs to be serviced. We need to move to the modern world of being able to troubleshoot things remotely and provide that kind of access. So it's got to be a comprehensive approach of, I've got to employ zero trust to allow my vendors to come in and service their equipment, but only to allow them to access what they need to access on the OT. OT is bigger than HVAC controls. HVAC controls and BACnet is a portion of it, tends to be a big portion of it, but there's a lot of other stuff that's happening as well. And then what are you doing on the inside? And I would say to get started, let's protect from the outside coming in, and then slowly figure out a way to what can we do additionally to protect the inside. And we in real estate, we'd love to say, let's do it tomorrow, but we know the reality of it. Dollars are really hard to come by in real estate. You guys have all walked into that engineer's office where there's 5 different PCs, who knows what version of Windows it's on, or one's running an old AX machine, one's running an N4 machine. You're going to they'll ask you a quote to clean it up. You'll give them a quote for 10 to 20 grand. What's their response going to be? Maybe next year we'll get in the budget. They want a new $50,000 painting in the lobby. They're going to buy it tomorrow. That's just how real estate thinks. So what are the simple things that you can do? Take a simple approach, pragmatic approach, and slowly start to get to the, to my point is, what's the North Star where you want to get to? We know real estate's not going to move that fast, but there's small incremental things that you can do as best practices to start moving them in that direction.
And Aaron, I love your idea of the system integrator bringing it as a value add, right? It's a method and a secure way to do business, because remote access, let's face it, it's a privilege. COVID taught us one thing, is that business can continue working from home, but you're working in degraded mode. You really do lose a lot of what makes it good. But with this industry, remote access is a force multiplier. I can have one engineer take a look at 30 buildings if I was remotely accessing them to take a look at what their status is and how they're operating. And if you can do it with zero trust, and bring that as an operational model for you, now you're doing it without risk. And it's a huge value add.
Yeah, I would say also go back in my career. At one point in my career, I did BMS control, energy management, on-tree tracking across all the Bank of Americas across the country. And when we started that project, and this was a long time ago, their initial thought was, we're going to save all our money on energy savings because we're going to be more efficient. Do you know where they save their money? Truck rolls. Truck rolls. Because now there's a command center that could access it. They could diagnose, there's a problem on this rooftop unit, coil number 2's not working. So when they made that truck roll, that technician did not have to go to thermostat, didn't have to troubleshoot, went straight to RTU number 2, knew they had to look at that. It's a huge part of it. Now you can then layer that in with, hey, let's practice the latest and greatest when it comes to cyber as well and make sure that you're protected at the same point.
So I'm going to ask a really, really dumb question. In your example, Mike, if we have a zero trust solution in place, right, and the threat comes from within the building, now we said that zero trust is verifying, authenticating over and over again as the data moves throughout the network, right?
Yep.
As these devices broadcast. So if it didn't come from outside the building, it came from inside the building, would a solution that's made for the facilities industry be able to detect, right, that threat as something that's not supposed to be on that network?
Yeah, because you're dealing with a device and you're dealing with an identity. And that identity doesn't necessarily have to be a person. It could be a system-to-system type communication. We call those flows, right? So different systems talk to different systems. They have different flows. Take a very simple approach to video surveillance. I've got an IP video camera that's recording an image. I'm going to send it to a piece of hardware that's going to record that image. Why would I ever want my HVAC control to talk to a camera? I can't even think of a possible reason. So again, that's an internal flow. So if you have the system set up to microsegment or control those granular interactions between devices, that's going to come across as an unauthorized flow and therefore get triggered. Not only that, but it's also inside to outside is one of the bigger ones. I'm very familiar with, there was a state-owned piece of malware that was residing on BAS servers. And all it was a wait and look. That's one of the big penetration tests, right? I call it the spider in the web. You go in and you build your web and you put out your feelers and you don't do anything. You just wait and see what hits the web, right? And you do that for years and you're just collecting information on the operations. You don't do anything because you don't want to get kicked out. So what ends up happening is something gets triggered and now I need to go contact to get a resource from the outside world. And all too frequently, the zero trust platforms will stop that from happening. No, you're not allowed to go talk to that server. No, you're not allowed, because you're not allowed outside the internet. You should never go outside the internet. Your job is to operate inside the building. So those zero trust systems, to your point, it's like a castle where you have multiple layers of defense and different ways that they can control the interactions. And that's where the big value comes in.
So Aaron, so from your perspective, do you run into a lot of clients who feel like trying to deploy or implement zero trust practices is a budgetary problem?
Well, it's real estate. Everything's a budgetary problem, right?
Real estate.
It's kind of, what's OpEx versus CapEx, right? And how can they get the dollars to do it? And so, when we're dealing with real estate, and when I say real estate, it could be commercial, it could be K through 12. It's just all of the retail. If they have the IT team, they've already budgeted dollars, and those are existing dollars, and so it's a matter of, how can you do it with a better mousetrap, and it's a lot easier to implement. And then there's others that, they weren't spending anything, and now you're going to ask for more money on top of it. It becomes a problem. And then even system integrators, like I said, I've been on the road, the majority of the last year meeting with them all over, and I can't tell you how many times we leave or end and they just look and say, I know I should have been doing something about this years ago. I still just haven't done anything.
So,
right? And they need to. Here's the time to take action, and it doesn't take a lot of money to get started.
I just wanted to give an example of the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense has 8 million computers that they secure in IT, and they spend $30 billion a year securing those 8 million computers. They have 2 billion OT nodes, and they spend $150 million. So 30 billion for IT, 150 million for OT. That's where we are today, and that is a silo of very intelligent people that have a critical need. And you can see that they're several orders of magnitude away from spending the kinds of money they need to spend to get serious about this problem.
Well, they actually have to do it. I plugged in on an Army base once, and I could see everything on the network with my company laptop. And this wasn't that long ago.
I was working at a park along the river in Michigan, and I plugged in, and I could see all the Border Patrol. How did they get locked in? I don't know. We were doing some troubleshooting, and next thing I know, I see a printer, and it says, belongs to it, so I printed. Couldn't help myself.
But this is
hey,
the,
FYI.
This is the underlying issue, though, is they know they need to do something, but the IT doesn't match the OT.
Right.
Right.
And so they're just trying. They're trying to do the best they can with what they have, but nobody's like really embraced it to say, I own this. I know this has to be something completely different, and I need to solve this problem.
You got a question?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what are some examples, especially for like existing infrastructure, of early implementations that get the building owner or property owner to feel like they've got a way headed towards the right direction that maybe was the appetite for doing more down the road?
Yeah, real start, where's the internet? What's connected to whatever that Comcast router is? What's in between that? What's the next layer down? And you need to start right there at the perimeter and no other access. And then the other thing is how many cradle points are out there? How many cellular connections that are out there? I did a federal courthouse once. Super secure. We're walking around. Guess what we found in the carrier chiller panel? A cradle point.
Swiss cheese.
A cradle point.
Yeah, nothing like cellular remote
to get
connectivity.
started, start at the perimeter. Make sure you are securing the perimeter. Then implement Zero Trust for the remote network access. Get that up and running, and then slowly start planning for, how are we going to start implementing BACnet SC? Because, the reality of it is, if the job was done 5 years ago, they're not going to go to BACnet SC until, maybe 10 years later. But there's a way that you can protect it there at the perimeter. And some of that's just good enough. Good enough. You can go on Showdown. How many Niagara sites can you see on Showdown? Oh, they're still there. There's a ton of them. A simple device, you can protect it, and it's gone. It's no longer visible, and you're protected.
You got a question?
Yeah, and I think this kind of ties in maybe to some of these other presentations we've been looking at, like BIM, Kobe, the digital twin. Is that, I'm getting the sense that that's more of like a stopgap where, if you need to take your project and make it secure, the digital twin is that air gap between your building systems, the on-prem, and what information you want to collect from all those different sources. So how does that play in?
What's a digital twin? Sorry. Come on, no, as there's just so many different.
Might as well ask what a smart
But to
building
your
is.
point, though, like secure the building, but then we all know what's happening, right? I get a call at least 1 to 2 a week from system integrators that say, all right, Aaron, you told me that my customer was going to tell me I got to get my Windows machine out of the building and I got to move the BAS to the cloud. Are you guys getting those calls? It's happening. And you're wondering why. Because it's not the facility guy, it's the IT team told them to do it, but then they also told them, you need to figure it out, too. Right? But ultimately, it's a better way to protect those machines from ransomware. But the other part with those cloud connections is, how are the buildings going to get smarter and more intelligent, and how are we going to adopt AI? It has to be a secure data connection to the cloud. That's how AI works. So you're protecting it, and while you're protecting it, you're now putting in the plumbing that's needed to enable the cloud at the same time.
Yeah, and that's not air-gapped.
Not air gap.
They're directly connected.
Yeah.
Right, so an air-gap system would be like an automatic transfer switch for an emergency generator. That is literally a standalone unit. It receives a very simple signal, whether or not there's power coming into it or not, and it needs to trigger, right? A lot of those are programmable now. So now you have a service tech that comes in with his laptop or their laptop, and who knows what's on that laptop, but they plug it in and they upgrade the firmware for it. Well, in the background, because they've been to so many places, maybe they have something on their laptop, and now your automatic transfer switch that is technically air-gapped from the rest of everything else in your facility is now infected. So when it receives that little signal that the power went out and it should transfer over to generator and kick it in, it's not going to work because it was programmed, right, maliciously programmed not to do that. But digital twins are directly connected through, they thrive on sensors. Right, so they thrive on information. So they need information from your building. If you're talking about an operational digital twin, right? So if you want to take a look at something and see it spinning and what its RPMs and get all the values from it, it's directly connected. Now you might not have command and control, right? So that if I make a change to my digital twin software here, that it's going to affect something physically, but they are connected. And that's one of the three ways, to go back to your question about like what are the ways that you get connected. Number one is anything on-prem going to the cloud. Right, requires an internet connection to go to the perimeter side. Anything that requires data from the outside from other sources. To your point, Shodan.io, if you go to that website and you type in BACnet, you're going to get a bunch of controllers out there that are exposed to the internet. Why? Chances are good they needed weather data. So somebody went out and bought a cable modem because it was super easy. They plugged their BAS system in that's sitting underneath somebody's desk somewhere in the building. And now I've got this thing exposed directly to the internet, right? Then I got a huge vulnerability. The other thing is remote access. So really that kind of ties back into the zero trust piece is I'm going to connect the system to the internet so that I can log in from my phone or on the road wherever I am if they ever have a problem. So those are the three main reasons why you would have these systems exposed to the internet. So as a property manager or somebody in the operations field, say, do I have any of these three things? Do they exist? And then can I do it better, right?
So just to your digital twin comment, I think that if you look at the NIST cybersecurity framework and the monitoring requirement that we have, one of the things that we need to know for cybersecurity, as for many of the other things we need to do for digital twin or BIM, is it's an asset management story. So understanding the network topologies, understanding where the equipment is, that's all part of cybersecurity as well. Understanding an inventory of what you have, understanding the software bill of materials that it's comprised of. So what you're really doing with this cybersecurity stuff is monitoring, right? And that is a key part. And if you can imagine what we've done in fault detection and diagnostics on mechanical systems, imagine that same technology being applied to cyber systems, where the monitoring systems are actually looking for faults. So as Mike was saying, you know, there's these predetermined things that can go wrong. Well, we can basically build AI, if you will, or rules-based analysis or whatever else we want to do FDD for cybersecurity. And that's really what these systems will have in the future. And that's where they're going to tie into BIM and digital twins at that level, sort of as an asset management level story from my perspective.
Thanks, Jim. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I appreciate your attention. Questions? Got one back there, here.
Yes. So we talked about sensors and meters and devices, right? You can make those secure. We can make a protocol secure. You secure the network, air-gapped and everything. I think the biggest component that remains is the human capital, right? The technicians, the engineers. On IT side, there's 1.5 million programs, certifications, training courses, Cisco, CCNA, whatever, to train IT folks into cybersecurity. Are there any targeted program, certification, training courses for OT technicians and engineers that could be of help?
Yes, there is a woman named Melissa Boutwell, who in a previous life was in charge of running this convention center. And she has a government-sanctioned business with the Department of Labor with training courses in this field. And unfortunately, somebody can remember the name of her company, Anto? ASP. There we go. So yes, there are training courses available today.
So my question's along the same lines is, you're talking about doing an OPR, bringing it down into the facilities level, et cetera, is where is the training for the facilities manager who doesn't even know what BACnet is to start with? And now you're using a bunch of TOAs that they have no idea what you're talking about. And so, it's that same thing, is there basic training out there for these people to understand?
Yeah, I mean, at what level are we talking about training at, right? Because every day we live our lives securely. You don't show your PIN number for the banks, right? You don't share that with anybody. You change your password, at least you should on a regular basis for whatever it is you're logging into. Those are some basic cyber hygiene things that apply directly to this. If you're doing the configuration, you're doing the maintenance on it, then that comes from the manufacturer. I'm actually looking and reviewing a ton of documentation from different manufacturers right now for a client talking about cybersecurity and its operational aspect, right? So it's part of the life cycle. That's what I always refer to all the time as the life cycle of the building. And so it's up to the manufacturer. You can see what's capable on the device and read the manuals. It's all right there and ready to go. So when you talk about the OPR should state that there should be some type of commissioning process at the end of it, right? That's the walking behind the elephant and cleaning everything up. And the OPR, the commissioning person would hand you a book, an operationalized model containing all the relevant documentation that you would need. Unfortunately, that's your training, right? That's the way it is right now. But that's why this is so important to get the industry and make this table stakes so that those programs can get developed, so that when you are now responsible, and I work with clients all over the place, different areas, different modes of operation, where they have a construction team and they have a facilities team, and those two don't work, right? So they construct and they design and they build, and then these guys now have to run and operate the facility without any of the information or input. So we're starting to see some shifting in that, and that's part of why we're out here today, is kind of getting that message across to hopefully facilitate that and make it happen.
And one thing you can do today, Greg talked a lot about RECC. Follow them on LinkedIn. They have a newsletter. Little plug for Neve. Follow us on LinkedIn. We have a newsletter. We have podcasts that explain what Zero Trust is, how it works with OT and cloud environments. There's some good resources as far as certifications. I'm not up to speed on that, but talk to Greg in RECC. Find some RECC members. They'll point you to some really good stuff that you can stay connected with.
Yeah, and we also have on the Cochrane website, smartbuildingdesign.com, we have a cybersecurity tab that has a lot of resources, right? Like basic cyber policies that you guys can pass down to your owners who may not have a cyber policy, right? And there's some other interesting information there. With that being said, we're over our time. Really appreciate your patience and not getting up and leaving us. Hopefully, this is where we start to slow down.
Yeah, there we go.